Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm very much welcoming to you to this Charities Trustees meeting of Mid Sussex District Council. Firstly, I would like to thank the Hurstpere College for being the host location on this occasion. Members, please be advised that the meeting is being live streamed and officers will be bringing a microphone to each speaker. Everyone should allow a moment for the microphone to get to them before speaking. The live stream will continue through the council meeting, so members are to remain in place and quiet in between each meeting. At this point, I would like to say at the start of the meeting, could I please ask, if you wish to ask a question, please raise your hand, and when I indicate, could you please stand and give us your name before asking your question. This is due to the significant size of the room and to my failing eyesight. Thank you. So I'm going to read now the fire evacuation information, please. This announcement is made at the start of the meeting. As normal, the building is protected by a fire alarm system with several break glass alarms situated around the room. On hearing the evacuation alarm, 1, please leave the building by the nearest marked exit route. There's a fire exit to my left and 2 exits at the back of this room, either side of the entrance that you came in. Please, number 2, proceed to the assembly point situated on the middle car park where you parked today, and only take valuables immediately to hand. Number 3, anyone who requires assistance will be helped by the officers present after other people have left. Do not return to the building until told it is safe to do so by the senior fire brigade officer or council officer attending in the case of a false alarm. Smoking is not permitted in the building. Filming from the public seating area is permitted, but members must please refrain from filming so as not to distract the meeting. Mobile phones must be switched to silent. Thank you. So, item 1 on the agenda is to confirm as correct record the minutes of the meeting held on 29th of September 2021, number 3, pages 3 and 4 in your agenda. Have anyone got any queries? Oh, please raise their hand. I can't see any. So I'm going to invite members to agree the minutes by a show of hands, please.
Clear majority, Chairman.
Thank you. We confirm that has been carried. So we're moving on to item 2, to receive declarations of interest from members in respect of any matter on the agenda. Members have a declaration to be declared. Can they please raise their hand? Excellent. No. Thank you. Moving on to item 3, to consider any items that the chairman of the Charity Trustees agrees to take as urgent business. I have none. So now I'm moving on to item 4, the St John's Park Charitable Trust, Burgess Hill, West Sussex, charity number 305189, pages on your notes of 5 to 14, is going to be proposed lease disposal. I'm going to invite the Head of Regulatory Services, Tom Clark, to speak on this item.
Thank you, Chairman. As members will see from the report, it has rather a long history. What is proposed today is to clarify that in the terms of a lease as things stand at the moment, and the lease gives the cricket club exclusive use of certain rooms in the pavilion and also of their cricket nets and control over the way they deal with their cricket square. They've been doing that under license for some time now, but it should be done by a lease. As I said, this is the position at the moment. If things change, then the charity trustees can come back. You'll notice in the report we've been through the statutory requirements. We advertised the proposed lease. We got no responses, so it seems people are satisfied. And also the independent surveyors confirmed that the lease terms are market rent, and therefore there's no problem for the charity in granting this lease. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'm now happy to take any members' questions or comments. If you wish to speak, could you indicate by raising your hand? Councillor Eggleston.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd just like to welcome this report, and think it's a positive step for the cricket club, which has great aspirations in Burgess Hill to build the club and improve upon its status as one of the leading clubs in Mid-Sussex, and this is a very welcome step. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eggleston. Does anyone else wish to speak on this? I can see none. So I'm going to move this item from the chair. The recommendations, shall I read them?
Members, you'll find the recommendations on page 12.
I'm happy to read them, if that would assist you. Shall I just read them for clarity? Recommendation on page 12, the charity trustees are recommended to 11.1, note the absence of any responses to the statutory advertisements placed in the Mid-Sussex Times on the 26th of August and 2nd of September, giving notice of the charity trustees' intention to grant the proposed lease, and note consider the proposal set out in paragraph 3.4 of this report and the independent surveyor's report. And welcome, councillors. 11.2, if, having considered this report and the independent surveyor's report, and charity trustees consider that it is in the best interests of the charity to grant the proposed lease to the club, then, subject to the club agreeing to pay costs, including the costs incurred in complying with the charity trustees' statutory obligations, authorise the charity's trustees' solicitor to grant the lease on the terms set out in this report and the independent surveyor's report, and on such other terms as the charity trustees' solicitors recommends or considers appropriate. Could we all vote, please, by raising your hands? Thank you.
Clear majority, Chairman.
Thank you. If there's no other business, I'm going to conclude this meeting at 18:54. Thank you for your attendance, and I would ask the members to remain in place as the live stream remains in place and the public can enter the room, and then await the 7 p.m. start of the main council meeting. Thank you very much. Good evening, members of Mr. Bright and also councillors. You're very welcome to the full council meeting of Mid-Sussex District Council. Please note that the live stream will have continued from the trustees meeting. So on that note, I'm going to pass the Vice Chairman to read the opening prayer.
Thank you, Chairman. O Lord, grant us courage to strive for what is right and good, courtesy to listen to those of different opinion, strengthen us through difficulties and pressures, and guide us in our deliberations so that we may act in the interest of all in our district, to the glory of your holy name. Amen.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Item 2 is to receive questions from members of the public pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 3. I believe that we have one member of the public, Mr. Bright, is here with us today. Would you like to ask your question, sir? Please proceed.
Am I okay? My wife and I make these representations as individuals and not as part of any political or lobby group. My wife cannot attend, unfortunately, as she is on duty at Clare Hall. On the 14th of September, MSDC changed Clare Hall's status from a performing arts centre to a community centre to avoid the July 2020 government directive to prevent the closure of such performing arts centres. It is clear from the recent consultation that there's now an urgent need for a meanwhile solution for Clare Hall to allow the community to rediscover normal life again while replacement planning takes place. Can MSDC please ensure that the community that they will urgently plan for this meanwhile solution? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the Leader of the Council to respond.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you for your question, Mr. Bright. Clare Hall was a community centre when it closed in March 2020 in accordance with COVID restrictions. Since December 2020, there has been a meanwhile use in place in that the NHS is using the building as a COVID and flu vaccination centre, and that work will continue into the next year. The Council will continue to support the NHS use of the building as required. The first stage of the public consultation and engagement programme on the future of the Clare Hall site closed on the 22nd of September. Responses are now being analysed by the independent consultants so that the final report can be considered by the Cabinet in December. And I'd again like to thank the members of the public and community groups who've taken part in that consultation. I do believe, Chairman, that the public and the community groups that have taken part will have a reasonable expectation that their feedback will be considered before any further decisions are made, and that is what's going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Mr. Bright, you have the opportunity to ask one supplementary question related to the response that you have received. Would you like to do so?
Yes, I would like to ask
Please proceed.
A question, please. And that is that I do see on the agenda this evening under item 7 an asset policy document, which I believe, if this is implemented, would severely limit the ability for a meanwhile solution to be developed. And so my question is, could this policy document be changed to facilitate organisations to use the information that MSDC holds with regard to the historical performance of Clare Hall in terms of finances, marketing and use, such that anybody who is interested in a meanwhile solution will have the opportunity to face up to what is in this document, extremely onerous commercial requirements that nobody will be able to fulfil on a community basis without the information being provided by Mid Sussex District Council. And this will preclude the meanwhile solution being properly developed. That's my question.
Thank you.
I hope it's not too garbled.
I'm going to ask the leader if he wishes to respond or wishes to respond in writing to your question.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to respond now. Thank you for your supplementary question, Mr. Bright. I think what I would say on the policy that's before the Council, obviously that's a matter for debate shortly, and I just note that it has been very carefully considered by the Scrutiny Committee. And it is right that there are sensible arrangements in place for community buildings should any asset transfers be considered. But in relation to Clare Hall, no decisions have been made, and I'm not going to prejudge the reporting of the consultation to Cabinet in December and the decisions that will need to be made at that point. And I would just finally note again, Chairman, that there has been a meanwhile use in place for Clare Hall since December 2020, and that is ongoing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you for attending. Going to now move on to item 3 to confirm the minutes of the meeting of Council held on the 29th of September 2021. Have we got any queries on the accuracy from members? If so, please raise your hand. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to compliment the minute taker on the accuracy of the minutes. However, there's a couple of things that I feel need to be corrected. And on page 13 of your papers, and am I right in saying that members have got a copy of the proposal? Thank you. Yes. So the first point is about flooding. It's incorrectly mentioned that I noted there have been heavy rainfall causing flooding within the district. That's really not what I said. And I proposed that we change that to he noted that these changes carrying on the CO2 issue will increase the frequency and intensity with further CO2 emissions and warming. A minor thing, but it's important, I think, that the minutes reflect what was actually said by myself. And then, if I may move on to the more substantive thing, and that is it suggests that we're asking for more participation from residents, and indeed we weren't. And so I'm suggesting that we go back to the original substantive motion we put forward to describe this second clause, let's say. This motion is to intensify Council's effort to reduce carbon emissions throughout the district, to take a lead in helping residents to reduce their own carbon footprints, and to play its full part in the national effort to achieve net zero by 2035. Thank you. I hope that's acceptable.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Members have been provided with the table paper with the revised working, and it is acceptable under the accuracy of minutes. So therefore, I'm inviting members to agree the minutes as amended by show of hands, please. Did you wish to speak, Councillor Eggleston? Are you voting? Sorry.
Chair, yes, under Procedure Rule 16.2, the accuracy of the minutes, I also want to raise a point which I know I've exchanged correspondence with yourself and the monitoring officer on, and the leaders of the other groups, and it also concerns the climate change motion. Members probably don't have the Constitution available because it's only geeks like me who read it on a regular basis. But the two procedure rules, Chair, are Procedure Rules 13.6 and 13.7. Members will recall that two amendments were moved to Councillor Brown and Councillor Eves' motion, one by Councillors Henwood and Hicks, and the second by Councillors Bradbury and Knight. The Henwood-Hicks amendment, they asked whether the movers of the motion would accept that wording, and they did accept that wording, which if the effect of which meant that the amendment moved from being covered under Procedure Rule 13.6 to be covered by Procedure Rule 13.7, alteration to a motion. So in effect, the Henwood-Hicks amendment formed part of the substantive motion ab origine, and I and the monitoring officer are agreed on that point. Thereafter, we part company very graciously with each other, I hasten to add. We then moved on to the Bradbury-Knight amendment, and they very helpfully identified what words would be added to the motion and what words...
Please. Could I just silence you for a moment? Point of order.
Chairman, unfortunately for Councillor Eggleston, I also understand the Constitution, and he started by referring to point 16.2, which says no discussion shall take place upon the minutes except upon their accuracy, and any question of their accuracy shall be raised by motion. It does rather feel, Chairman, that Councillor Eggleston is trying to extend the debate that we had last time rather than comment on the accuracy of the minutes.
If I may, Chair.
Yes.
So my argument is the minutes are inaccurate because they do not include the words that were added to the motion by alteration under 13.7, which the Bradbury and Knight amendment didn't delete. So the minutes should reflect the motion with the additional wording that was added to it, because there is no indication in the Bradbury and Knight amendment to show that the words were taken out. And, it's very, you can't see it from here, but you can see what words that Councillors Bradbury added to the original motion and which words that they deleted. And logic says all of the words in the preamble which they didn't delete, it follows therefore that any other words that they didn't delete in the resolution must, by logic, stay in that motion, and the minutes should therefore reflect the additional wording.
Thank you. I'm going to refer your comments to Mr. Clark.
As you've said, Councillor Eggleston, we are disagreed on this. You're right that there was a motion to which there was an addition, and that became the motion. And then there was an amendment from the Conservative group, Councillors Bradbury and the leader, and that is accurately set out in the minutes what the amendment was. And so I believe the minutes, subject to Councillor Brown's changes, are correct, and I would invite Council to approve the minutes with those changes.
So on that basis, I'm going to ask for a show of hands on the agreed changes to the motion that Councillor Brown has introduced that has been tabled. Could you please vote by raising your hand? It's carried. I'm sorry, could I have the votes against the motion? Any abstentions? Thank you. So the motion is carried. I think the motion is carried. I do not wish to take any further points on this motion. No problem. Thank you very much. Did you note that? Abstention. So I'm going to move on to item 3 to confirm the minutes of the council. We've done that. So we're moving on now to item 4 to receive declarations of interest from members in respect of any matter on the agenda. Any members wish to declare an interest, could they please raise their hand? I see none. I'm moving on to item 5 to consider any items that Chairman of the Council agrees to take as urgent business. I have none. I'm moving on now to the Chairman's announcements. You can see there the recent engagements that I and the Vice Chairman have undertaken, which have been extremely enjoyable. I'm looking forward to many Christmas events that are coming up. So I'm going to move on. We're moving on to item 7, which is the Community Management and Asset Transfer Policy, which is proposed by Councillor Webster. And it's, please stand, Councillor Webster. And I believe it's seconded by Councillor Llewellyn-Burke. Would you like to speak?
Thank you, Chairman. Colleagues, this community management and asset transfer policy began its journey through the democratic process at the Scrutiny Committee for Leader, Finance and Performance before being considered by Cabinet on the 7th of June 2021. As it states very clearly in the accompanying report, this policy sets out the broad principles, criteria and process for considering a request and/or inviting submissions for the transfer of new and existing council-owned assets to community management. It was made clear at the Scrutiny Committee meeting that this policy simply formalizes current practice and will increase transparency as potential hirers will, potential leaseholders will know exactly what the requirements are. The Council is keen for community groups to flourish and will provide help to ensure that they succeed when taking on the lease of a community asset. Chairman, for all of the reasons mentioned in the report, I'm happy to support the recommendation as listed in paragraph 2 of the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Webster. Councillor Llewellyn-Burke, I believe you wish to second it. Do you want to speak now or reserve your right?
I'll reserve my right to speak, thank you.
Thank you. So, members, this is referred to on pages 19 to 30 of your documents. Would anybody member wish to raise a question, or has anyone raised their hands to speak? Would you like to stand, please, and give us your name?
Sorry, Councillor Hicks. Yes, Chairman, I welcome the amendments to the policy since the Scrutiny Committee, and noting the relaxation of the Appendix B from a template to an example, for example. However, I would highlight that the default requirement for full repairing lease, which seems to be what the wording implies, is unduly arduous for many small local charities, particularly when taking on an existing property where they may find that on taking over a lease, the roof needs replacing within a few days of having signed a new lease. And we've seen that with Sheddingdean Community Centre, which is in the process of winding up because it didn't want to take on it didn't want to take on a full repairing lease and the liability that would come with that. And I think it is disadvantageous for small community charities to take on such liability. I note the reference to rent subsidy, and I think in terms of any business plan which the council would help these groups to evolve, needs to take in the potential liabilities and the risks that the trustees of any charity would be willing to take on. In the case of the Sheddington Communities Association, we've now lost local volunteer input, and the council is managing the property itself, no doubt at greater cost. And it's unlikely to find a new partner very soon to manage what is an old and not very flexible building. So although I support the policy in terms of reading into its principles that there is the basis for adjustment of those factors, we do need to be very aware in terms of how it is implemented that these factors are taken into account. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hicks. Councillor Webster, do you wish to respond, or you've noted it? Thank you. Please.
Thank you, Councillor Hicks, for raising that important issue. And it was exactly for that reason that I said that this was a broad setting out of the principles, because we obviously want community organisations to flourish in Mid-Sussex, and we do have a very good reputation in terms of partnership working, and that will always be at the forefront of our thinking on these issues. And we also have a duty to maintain our buildings to a certain level. They are, after all, owned by the council, and the council is funded with taxpayers' money, and that needs to be the overriding principle. But thank you very much for raising that, and that is obviously something that we keep in mind. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Webster. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I want to echo Councillor Hicks. I'm going to support the motion, but I want to make a similar point. My ward is actually quite rich in these facilities, not all of them council-owned, but they're all have faced significant problems with maintenance. And I think that's a problem which is going to increase as all the public buildings around here strive to meet the new requirements on buildings, to meet the carbon targets and so on. And I think the council should perhaps consider, when resources allow, the possibility of an audit to really look across the district in order to understand just how widespread this problem is. Because certainly I think I see one or two problems coming up in my district. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Webster, do you wish to respond?
Thank you, Councillor Gibson, for raising the issue of increased requirements of buildings in the future in terms of environmental efficiency and so on. The community grants the community's team do work very closely with the community and advise them on the grants that are available both locally and nationally, and that will continue in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Webster. I see no other hands, so I'm going to go to Councillor William Burke.
Thank you, Chairman.
It's your charisma.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the support that the Scrutiny Committee has given in the discussion that we had regarding this topic. And as Councillor Webster has said, this is a framework, it's a policy framework, there's a lease, and it should make it much clearer for the residents within our communities to know the pathway that lies ahead, when they want to both use and lease the buildings, and it will help us all in our greater understanding of it and usage of the building. So I have no hesitation in seconding the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll move on to, nobody else wishes to speak, to the recommendations, which I will read for the benefit of members and viewers and listeners. The recommendation is on page 19, that the Council adopts the Mid-Sussex District Council Community Management and Asset Transfer Policy. Could I have members to raise their hands if they're in agreement? Those that object, are you happy with the result? I'm happy with it. Okay, thank you very much. So that is carried, the recommendation. So I'm going to move on to item 8, to receive the leader's report. So could I invite the leader, Councillor Ash Edwards, to speak, please?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just one matter to report. This evening, Chairman, following the Chancellor's autumn budget and spending review last week, where the outcome of round 1 of the Levelling Up Fund was announced. It's clearly very disappointing that Burgess Hill wasn't successful in the first round. There were over 300 bids submitted to the government across the UK, and we always know that it would be a highly competitive process. 105 bids were awarded across the UK, the vast majority of which were in the highest priority groups set out in the Levelling Up Fund prospectus. And as members will recall, Mid-Sussex was level 3 in that prospectus. Only 15 projects in southern England were successful in round 1, with a clear emphasis on bids in around the coast for those categorised initially as in most need. But importantly, Chairman, only around a third of the Levelling Up Fund has been announced in round 1. As you'd expect, we have already requested a feedback meeting to support an application to further rounds of the fund. The bid for Burgess Hill is strong, and these are important projects for the town and for the local economy, and we will continue to work with our local MPs and New River to make the case for these projects to be delivered. And I know that it is a disappointment that the funding hasn't been made available for the government to help unlock the town centre redevelopment, as well as the other benefits that would have been delivered through the Levelling Up Fund bid, such as the digital hub and the public realm improvements. And we will continue to explore all options to unlock this public and private sector investment, and as I said, including considering a bid to the next round of LUF, which we expect to open next spring. And of course, Chairman, I will update the Council as soon as there is more information available. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jonathan Edwards. Councillor Eggleston.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and just like to thank the Leader of the Council for his report. I share his disappointment. Were it not for the fact that we were in a council chamber, I could choose a few more pithier words to describe the situation, but we'll go with disappointment at the moment. I did submit a number of questions to Councillor Ash Edwards, but before we move on to those, I mean, just as to reflect, not as a councillor from Burgess Hill, but as a resident of Burgess Hill for many years, that the situation that we find ourselves in as residents with the Martlet Shopping Centre, which quite frankly, and I apologise for, this is emotional language, but it hangs over us like a curse. And as I said to officers at a briefing, for residents, the situation is both emotionally and psychologically scarring. It has gone on for many years, and I'm not pointing the finger of blame at anyone at all. I'm just observing a fact of life, that this situation has gone on for too long. And I hope members will understand how those of us who live in Burgess Hill feel absolutely drained by this situation. And I know that, that as a district, that there is other investment going on in Burgess Hill, in the greater economic area, and we don't disregard that. But it is important that we understand as a council that for residents of Burgess Hill, we actually value the redevelopment of the Martlet shopping centre rather higher than some of the other things. And we need to, as a district, and New River Retail as the party that manages that estate needs to reflect on the situation that we find ourselves in, and we need to, not just with a resubmission of the Levelling Up Fund, we need collectively to do something to ameliorate the situation that we find ourselves in, and that's really just a plea as a resident from the bottom of my heart. Moving on to the questions, I don't know, do you want, there are 9, so I apologise. Do you want to take them 3 at a time? Would that be easier? Or 1 at a time even?
Councillor Eggleston has kindly provided me with the full list in advance, so I can take them either 1 at a time or en bloc, whichever you prefer, Chairman.
We take them en bloc, if that's all right.
I've shared them with Mr. Clark, so he can share them with people taking the minutes. So question 1, will a written analysis of the strengths and weaknesses in the bid be provided to members? Number 2, can you confirm that Mid Sussex District Council will be resubmitting its bid? And if so, for there to be an opportunity for members, probably through the relevant scrutiny committee, to have an input into this resubmission? Number 3, does a resubmission need to be for the same project mix, or does the council have the option of amending it to support other town centre shovel-ready projects? I guess you know what I'm referring to there. Number 4, given the vagueness over the timing of the opening of the second round of bids, could you give an indicative timeline on works commencing and completing should a second bid be successful? Number 5, how would that timeline be secured with New River? Number 6, how does the non-award affect the funding and timing of delivery of the Church Walk public realm improvements? Number 7, whilst we all want to remain positive and optimistic, there is a probability that this element of the master plan will not be deliverable. Accordingly, has there been any contingency planning or discussions within Mid Sussex District Council or with New River which would constitute a deliverable and acceptable Plan B? If yes, number 8, when could that be shared with members? And 9, if no, would it not be prudent to commission that work so that either way, a successful bid or alternative Plan B in the redevelopment of the Martlet shopping centre could commence during the spring of 2022? I bet you're glad I sent them to you in advance.
Councillor Ashley Edwards, please, if you'd like to respond. You're going to respond en bloc to them?
I will do, Chairman,
Thank
if that's
you.
okay. And thank you again, Councillor Eggleston, for advance notice of the questions. It is always helpful to be able to have that to try and give the best answers possible. So I think the first point I would just make generally is, town centres matter to all of us. They're a really big part of our communities, aren't they? And we want all 3 of the towns in our district to survive as well as to thrive as well as all of the village centres. And so, this council has continuously over a long period of time now sought to support and facilitate the delivery of the town centre regeneration project in Burgess Hill, and we will continue to do so. On question 1, it's a little bit premature as we haven't yet received feedback from government in terms of the sort of nature of the bid and how it performed compared to others. And what we're able to then share is a little bit constrained by the commercial confidentialities of the bid by its very nature. But once we've got further feedback, that will of course inform future work in this area. In relation to the second question, it's sort of very similar to the answer to the first, really, which there is commercial confidentiality to these kinds of projects, and indeed that was a sort of condition of part of the LUF prospectus. So again, there are some constraints in terms of what can be publicly shared, as members will appreciate. What I would just say, though, is that this council regularly makes bids for funding on behalf of our communities. Burgess Hill has been the single biggest beneficiary of that in recent years. And the approach we take is to only make bids for things that are existing policy commitments, either through decisions this council has made or things in neighbourhood plans and so on. And so, members should be reassured that what we seek to do through bidding processes, of which there are many, and it's a routine part of this council's work, very many bids get submitted every year for things, is we seek support to deliver existing policies of this council, and that's the way we'll continue to go forward. On question 3, around the sort of nature of any resubmission, as I've said in my report, we will look, of course, to make a further bid to the subsequent round of the Levelling Up Fund, and only around a third of the funding has so far been committed, so all is not lost. We'll obviously need to see what the criteria are for round 2 in terms of whether it's the same bid or an amended bid, and obviously that will have to take into account any feedback we receive from government, but also any changes there have been in the market, because I'll just remind the council that the Levelling Up Fund bid is about trying to deliver projects that would otherwise not be delivered or are subject to some kind of market failure, and so we'll need to, at the point a new bid is made, ensure that it's updated to the prevailing circumstances. Councillor Eggleston asked about whether other projects could be included. I think he sort of alluded to what he had in mind in the questions he gave me. He referred specifically to the Beehive, which I think is what he has in mind. He's nodding. Just in relation to that, see, we haven't seen the criteria for the next round, but the criteria for round 1 was only so that the government would fund projects that would otherwise not go ahead, where there had been some kind of market failure and these were stalled projects. And my understanding of the Beehive is that the Town Council has announced that it is in a position to go ahead in that it has financing in place, and so it wouldn't have fallen within the criteria for round 1. Obviously, if that position has changed, then I'll be happy to receive further information, but it wouldn't have qualified for round 1. In relation to the timelines, again, that depends on the timescales for the next round of bids. We know that the government is expecting to open round 2 in the spring. We don't know for sure when decisions will be made. I suspect probably in the budget next autumn, but we don't know that for sure. And so, again, it's hard at this stage to answer with any certainty the question about when could works commence if there was a successful bid in round 2, but my expectation is a similar kind of timescale, but a year further on. In relation to how a timeline is secured, again, we'll have to see what the prospectus is for round 2, but the round 1 project was very clear that legal agreements would be in place before government released Levelling Up Fund funding to ensure delivery, and that is very common and standard for any public sector funding to projects, that there is a delivery mechanism secured kind of in return for that taxpayer intervention, and so that would be the case. Again, that's the standard way of these kind of projects being secured through those legal agreements. Question 6, in relation to the public realm and sustainable transport improvements, we'll continue to work, Chairman, with the County Council over the design of the public realm works in this area to ensure that they are being designed that will allow for any further enhancements that can be secured through a bidding process to be incorporated. We won't want to do anything, of course, that would frustrate that in future in any way. And in relation to questions 7, 8 and 9, which kind of all really relate to the same thing, Councillor Eggleston sort of alluded to a plan B. I think what I'd say is that the criteria for the Levelling Up Fund in itself was that LUF would only consider projects where by definition there aren't other options for delivery. It required projects to be submitted where there was a stalled project that needed LUF funding to proceed. So by its very definition, we don't sit here with another oven-ready way forward, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to put forward a bid to the Levelling Up Fund because it clearly wouldn't have met that criteria. It's only been a week since the decision was announced, and so we do need to have a little bit of time to do the work on the next steps, and we'll continue to explore all the available options, as I said, including making a bid in the next round. But I would, Chairman, just again reinforce the commitment of this council to ensuring that we can make progress in this area, and that Burgess Hill, as with all of our towns, has a town centre that it can be proud of in the future. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Eggleston. Before you speak, Councillor Eggleston, you actually asked 9 questions, which obviously the leader has responded. And in view of fairness, I will allow you to come back on 3 points in relation to the answers that Councillor Ash Edwards has made. So just on 3 of those questions, I will allow you to respond.
Well, Madam Chairman, you must have read my mind, because I have 3. So one, just to clarify that, because I think my understanding was when I first became a councillor that the funding for place and connectivity was secured. So if I understand you right, that the church realm, the public realm improvements for Church Walk is dependent upon the council finding funding for it. Then actually I might just reduce this to 2 points. And then the second point is that, so I understand what you're saying, Councillor Edwards, about you need a shovel-ready project, and if you've got a plan B, then that might upend things. But does the council and you understand the risk that if a second bid is submitted and that second bid is also refused, that we're not a year on from anything further happening? We're quite possibly 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, maybe never, and that the council understands that risk.
Councillor Ash Edwards, do you wish to respond or respond in writing?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to respond now. So thank you, Councillor Eggleston. On the first point, in relation to place and connectivity, there is obviously quite a bit of funding already, about £21 million secured for place and connectivity. And what we were seeking to do through the Levelling Up Fund was enhance the projects that are already taking place. And what we will continue to do is ensure we can progress as much of the place and connectivity programme as we can with the funding that is currently available. And through the life of that programme, there is a level of flexibility between all of the projects. Members who've been closely involved in that work will have been aware of that, because different projects have slightly different timescales and can be funded out of different parts of that programme budget. And so we will continue to use that flexibility to get as much benefit out of that funding as physically possible. The point I was making is that we won't do anything that stops further enhancements being made. And so if we're able to secure additional funding to bring forward those next stages of the public realm works, then we'll do so, and we'll be able to slot them into the existing programme. In relation to the risk of a second bid not succeeding, I understand the point that Councillor Eggleston makes. And just to be really clear, Chairman, what I'm not saying is that that's the only approach. What I'm saying is we will need to look at all of the available options in light of the feedback on the bid. And of course, it would be stupid to not put forward another bid if we are in the spring, and that's a sensible way forward. But that's not the only approach, and of course we'll need to consider other options if they are available. But obviously we've only had a week since the decision, and so we will of course, Chairman, look at all available options. But I would just make the point that we have been through that work very recently in the run-up to the bid, and concluded that the Levelling Up Fund bid was the single biggest intervention in order to try and unlock this stalled scheme for Burgess Hill. And so that's why the Levelling Up Fund bid is quite important. But of course, we'll continue to explore any available option and see if we can progress things, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ash Edwards. Councillor Eaves.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to echo what Councillor Eggleston has said. Everybody in Burgess Hill feels very emotional about this matter. Many of my questions have been covered. What happens if we fail yet again, the second time and the third time? We could be hanging around for 2 years, doing nothing, waiting, and then not getting the money anyway. And my main concern is the hole in the middle of Burgess Hill, which is just a concrete slab known to many as the bomb site. What can we do with that slab while we're waiting? Let's put it to some good use, and let's cast around in the community for ideas. A resident said to me, what about a solar array? There must be things we can do with that area, because we can't guarantee that anything will come of this whole process. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ash-Edwards.
Chairman, thank you, Councillor Eaves. I'd simply dispute the idea that people will be hanging around doing nothing. This council has worked very hard to try and facilitate the delivery of what is a private sector led scheme, and I think it's wrong to categorise things in that way. And in relation to the piece of land that Councillor Eaves refers to, ultimately we want to see it redeveloped as part of the scheme that has got planning permission, and that's got to be the approach that we try and secure. I would just make the point that we did actually invite proposals for the use of that site, and none met the criteria that we set out for considering any proposals for that site.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Hicks and Councillor Henwood, but as you're with Miss, is it Councillor Hicks you wish to speak? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to press the leader a bit further on that in terms of it's been a very extended gap between the closure of the Martlets Hall and eventually its demolition. And in terms of leaving that bomb site for the next couple of years as a vacant lot, the requirements that the council put forward for temporary measures were for a very short period. I think we know it's going to be an extended period, and perhaps I would hope the council could look again at some interim measures to provide to improve that site and make some use of it in some way, or indeed to look at the case for the council itself to invest in the redevelopment as an investment property, just as it has in other areas of the district.
Thank you. Councillor Ash-Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. And obviously, I take note of the suggestions that Councillor Hicks made. I would just point out they are slightly contradictory, because on the one hand, getting the project moving means that site can't be used for an interim use. If we want a long-term use of that site, then that will slightly frustrate a redevelopment coming forward. And the criteria, the rationale for the criteria from the Deputy Leader considered bids for earlier in the year was very specifically because we wanted the Levelling Up Fund bid to go ahead. And so if you have a very long-term use of the site, then with a Levelling Up Fund bid that required projects to be shovel-ready and able to proceed, then clearly those two things are contradictory. So as I said, we'll continue to explore all of the options, but our goal has to be to try and make progress in terms of having a town centre that people can be proud of.
Thank you. Councillor Henwood.
Thank you. Over 50 years ago, I came to Burgess Hill as an immigrant. It was a small but vibrant town, and it continued to become more vibrant and to grow. I'm not emotional. The facts are the demise of the town centre began with the demolition of Martlets Hall. Mid-Sussex District Council were responsible for that. It is encouraging now to see that Mid-Sussex District Council are supporting these Levelling Up Fund and seem to be supporting Burgess Hill. I would hope they would take on some of the suggestions from Councillor Eaves and Councillor Hicks about 2-3 years using some of that derelict site to add a bit of vibrancy, initiative and innovation into that town centre. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ash-Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not a question of now supporting Burgess Hill. This council has worked really hard over a long period of time to secure, as Councillor Eggleston, in fairness, alluded to, very significant levels of inward investment into Burgess Hill and infrastructure investment not being seen in other parts of the district. And Chairman, I would just observe, I respect the point that Councillor Henwood makes, but I would just observe that I've now been asked by opposition members to ensure that the town centre redevelopment can happen really quickly, and that we can use the current site for something else for 2 to 3 years. That is a completely contradictory set of asks that we've had tonight, Chairman. And as I said, our goal needs to be ensuring that we can put forward the best case to help unlock this stalled project that has planning permission, so that we can make progress and Burgess Hill can have a town that it can be proud of.
Thank you, Councillor Ash-Edwards. Councillor Cartwright.
I think it was in 2010 when I went into local politics, having retired. And I remember in those days, there was a lovely video about the centre of Burgess Hill, a lot of glass, a lot of big shops and the like. Sadly, the economics of town centres has changed since those days, and that what we were intending to do in the good early days is not now looking so possible. The 10-screen cinema, some of the big names which were coming to Burgess Hill, etc., as part of this redevelopment project. And I think that at this point, although we don't aspire for a plan B, it would be very sensible to have a review as to what it is we're actually trying to achieve here, and whether some of the aspirations could be scaled down a bit to make them more realistic in terms of the economics which we're facing now. It's not just COVID, it's that town centre have been a problem since the banking collapse, etc. And there are possibilities we've been already discussing with New River, and we all have conversations with them, and they seem to be viable. One of the important things is actually to keep the economic life going in that north part of Martlets and not let it sort of die away, because the rest of the Martlets is still pretty vibrant and is bouncing along. But that there is a danger that if we leave it as it is, it's not really going to be possible to spark life back into it again, even if we get the refurbishment project going, with funds and the like after a second bid. So it would be very helpful if possibly we could not consider a plan B, but just quietly consider some sensible options with New River as to what we actually can do under the present circumstances, because I know that their economic life is suffering difficulty as well. So along with all of us. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Cartwright. Councillor Ash-Edwards.
Chairman, I think Councillor Cartwright makes some really good points, because the economics of town centres has changed. We've all been changing over a long period of time how we use town centres, how we shop, the kind of leisure activities we want to see in towns, and the challenge really is that that's been happening much faster than the private sector has been able to catch up and deliver a scheme that can be viable. And of course, the pandemic has significantly accelerated that. So I think Councillor Cartwright is right to make that observation, because this isn't a question, Chairman, of people not wanting to make progress. This is a question of what's actually doable in a very, very turbulent and fast-moving commercial environment. And we'll clearly need to explore all of the options. Councillor Cartwright's alluded to some of those. Other members have alluded to others. We'll clearly need to explore all of the options that there might be going forward. Thank you, Chairman.
And I'm sorry, Councillor Dempsey, I couldn't see you. Please.
No, not at all. Thank you, and apologies. There have been a lot of questions, so I'll make mine quick. I appreciate Councillor Ash-Edwards' a statement about potentially contradictory asks, but I'm not sure they're necessarily being characterised in the right way. So just for my clarification, if we all hope that any potential resubmission will be successful, But if one takes place and is not successful, and if we're then faced with a situation where there may be a delay of maybe 2 or more years before any future funding may come on stream, would the council at that point consider some kind of temporary use of the site, or is it being ruled out on a point of principle? So just a point of clarification. Thank you.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. Nothing's ruled out at all, Chairman, and indeed in the summer, as I said, the council invited proposals for a temporary use, and there weren't bids that came forward that met that criteria, and I've explained why it was necessary for the criteria to be as they are. But I rule nothing out, Chairman, and we'll carefully consider the possible options for the next steps.
Thank you. I'm going to move on, but I would like to thank all the councillors for the very interesting points they raised, and thank Councillor Edwards for his very full replies. Thank you. So we're going to move on to item 9 of the report of the Cabinet members, including questions pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 10. I'm going to start by asking the Deputy Leader, Councillor Llewellyn Burke.
Thank you, Chairman. There's been quite a lot of talk this evening about the change in retail and economic drivers and the way that we behave. And the one item that I wanted to mention was the shopping centre that I normally mention that the council owns and manages, which is the Orchards in Haywards Heath. And our residents do shop in at least 2 of the 3 towns, to my own personal knowledge. So the Orchards in Haywards Heath, we've now let a further 2 units there, and there are discussions underway to let the only remaining unit that is free in the Orchard Shopping Centre. So I think that shows that it is possible for new independent retailers to take in new units, and I really would like to see that replicated in Burgess Hill. So we're not going to stand still on this. Whatever influence we can use, we will endeavour to do so in order to make Burgess Hill vibrant, because that's what it should be. And we've had a pitfall with the Luff bid, but the Orchards is working, and it's visibly working. You know, please go and see it if you don't normally shop there. Just go and see it and take some optimism from that. And it can be done, and retail's changing, and we are adapting with it. And I'm sure other organisations that are in a similar position to us, able to lease units, will be able to do that themselves. Happy to take any questions.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Can I just ask, when did you last take a tour of the empty units on the Martlet Shopping Centre?
I'd have to look in my diary for that, but I do go to the Martlets regularly, yes. I'm in fact going to the dentist, I think next week or the week after, so I'll be walking down there.
A tour inside the empty units in the Martlet Shopping Centre?
I haven't been in the empty units.
Well, may I suggest you do it, because you will see one of the reasons why those units are difficult to let compared to the units in the orchards is that they are in a miserable state. They need, you know, for an independent retailer wanting to take on one of those empty units, they would have to spend tens of thousands of pounds to bring them back into any acceptable use. And that's why you have a difference between the orchards and the Martlet Shopping Centre. So I do invite you to take an opportunity. We can make arrangements with the centre manager there for you to see for yourself the condition of some of those units that we have to live with on a daily basis.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Eggleston, but the Orchards is owned and managed by Mid Sussex District Council, whereas the Martlets is not. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Madam Chairman, I apologise for this, but you're missing the point. You know, this is about economic viability of 2 shopping centres. The ownership isn't relevant. If your Mid Sussex District Council has an estate in Haywards Heath, which is in reasonably to good condition. The Martlet Shopping Centre, which is leased by New River Retail, some of those units are simply unlettable unless someone is prepared to spend tens of thousands of pounds. Now, if we as a district council could persuade New River to bring those units back into a state in which so that they can be let pending any redevelopment, then fine. But the reality is we can't let some of those units because of the condition that they are in. And, as the freeholder, I know it's on a long-term lease, but as the freeholder, we should go and look at them, and we should be rightly appalled by the state of some of them.
Thank you. I'm going to move on. Councillor Bates.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I tend to agree with what was said about the orchards by the Cabinet member, as I live in Haywards Heath and see it's nearly fully occupied. But you don't actually see the orchards when you drive through Haywards Heath, especially South Road, and I do have concerns of how that particular road is changing. And I think we need to keep an eye on trying to maintain the South Road, which is basically what people see coming through to Haywards Heath. And if they see a very empty shopped South Road, then they're not likely to think about going into the orchards.
Do you wish to come back, Councillor Llewellyn-Burke? I'm not sure it was a question or a statement.
Thank you, Councillor Bates, and thank you for your comments. Yes, I appreciate that with all the shopping centres, wherever they are, need to be kept updated and attractive to visitors, and that is something of importance to us as the freeholder in Haywards Heath, as well as being the council where we want our communities to be vibrant and active. We would like all three of our town centres to be good places to go to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Llewellyn-Burke. I'm going to move on to Cabinet Member for Economic Growth, Councillor Hillier.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few snippets, as it's not been long since the last meeting. For those that like statistics, I don't know why I was looking at Councillor Gibson, parking and display parking continues a very slow recovery. The transaction numbers are down 22% compared to September 2019, the previous month being 24% down, so that is a slight improvement. And also, members will probably be aware that the council car parks continue to support the national COVID testing programme. The current initiative is the West Sussex Retail Hub, which is an online training programme for retailers. It's going to run till 2023, and I'm glad to hear that already 30 mid-Sussex-based businesses have signed up for that, and the district's economy team are continuing further promotional work to increase that. And finally, I just actually almost want to pay tribute to my colleague, Councillor Dimir. During the pandemic, you'll obviously be aware that the economy and the revenue benefits team working very closely on the COVID grants. And I'm happy to say that's moved on now, and we have regular meetings every 6 weeks to 2 months in partnership with the local DWP office and job centre. And the reason that's important is it enables a lot of sharing of data and contextual evidence, and particularly around, so we get to find out where there may be more job vacancies than applicants, and areas, industry sectors where there is rising unemployment or redundancies, and it helps inform all parties to tailor their offer and training so that we can react and stay ahead of the curve. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hillier. Does anyone have a question for Councillor Hillier? No? Fine, that's great. Thank you very much for your report. So I'm going to move on to the Cabinet Member for Customer Services, Councillor Dimir.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Can you hear me okay? Yep. What? Good evening, and I'll be as brief as my colleague here. As I reported to you last time, we're contacting as many businesses as we can to apply for the expanded retail and nursery discount. And as you heard last week, the Chancellor announced that will continue the relief for retail, leisure and hospitality. So we will continue with those and process those applications. The test and trace applications, which have been extended through, as you know, to the end of March, have now increased as the number, sadly, of people testing positive for COVID has increased. But we're still glad to see that, as you know, this is for parents and guardians of children too. We're looking to extend our Tell Joe project. And as my colleague has said, what we're wanting to do is so that we're able to analyse the data so we can realise the impact of the end of furlough. As at the end of September, there were 3,600 on furlough, but it's important to know going forward the impact that this is going to have on the economy so that we're able to help those who haven't found new careers or jobs. As Councillor Hillier has said, the joint outreach hubs, the DWP, are going really well, and it's so good to see us working together as teams. There are some exciting initiatives coming up on these, so we're hoping that there will be success for everyone in this. We're also awaiting details of the new proposed discretionary COVID business rates relief scheme, which will be available from the end of the financial year. On comms, the next issue of Mid-Sussex Matters is at this moment at the printers, awaiting delivery to our post boxes, and I'm hoping you'll enjoy the read. Our next issue is already being planned and will include something very special, but you'll have to wait and see. As you will have seen, though, our comms team have worked on social media campaign around the COP26 ambitions, and this will continue. The team's also supporting the Welcome Back Fund, encouraging footfall. Lastly, as ever, when I get excited, update on our digital infrastructure programme. The Rural Connectivity Programme is now progressing very well, with all the construction drawings approved and the testing and commissioning planned for early spring next year. Work continues on the digital websites, etc., and the test landing page, as I explained last time, has been developed. And we're working with CNI to develop the transactional functionality, which will support the commercialisation of this. So that will produce a public-facing website for businesses and us in Mid-Sussex, and that will link to CNI providers, and then we can track the service requests. And the very last thing I wanted to say to you was on this programme, the social value work that's being undertaken. And it's this specific one, that we supported here at Hurstpere Point College. Our partners, Balfour Beatty, ran an engineering STEM challenge with the students. 2 teams worked on projects, and one of them was awarded a Crest Gold Award, yay, for their outstanding work. So that was a great event and helped to create the engineers for the future. Finally, in answer to Councillor Hicks, we're planning a digital workshop for all members after Christmas to bring us all up to speed so that I understand a bit more. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Councillor Dimir. Has anyone got? Councillor Brown.
Thank you. I would be grateful if Councillor Dimir could just expand a little bit more on the rural connectivity and the scope of that that's now being designed. Thank you very much.
Councillor Dimir, do you wish to speak or do you want to
Thank you,
provide
Madam
a written?
Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Brown. And the answer is, would you like, I'm looking at my colleague over there, at the moment, I think it might be wiser, as we are having regular member workshops on these, that if we waited for that, if you would like a few more details, I'm very happy to provide them for you.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett. Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Chairman. Great to hear that Balfour Beatty are doing outreach work in the community and including here in Hurstpierpoint College. Did they do much in any of the state schools in the vicinity as well as at a private school? Thank you.
Councillor Dimir.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Yes, they worked with primary schools as well. Would you like me to send you details?
Thank you. If there are no more questions, I'm going to move on. So I'm going to move on to the Cabinet Member for Environment and Service Delivery, Councillor John Belsey.
Good evening, everyone. When we last met, I briefed everyone about the implications of the fuel shortage. As we know, the fuel shortage issue has now been resolved, and this has allowed ID Verdi to catch up on the grass and hedge cutting, so that ID Verdi should now be back on track with the cutting programme. Following up on our green and open spaces, it was a pleasure to attend the opening of the latest play area and Muga in the district on Maple Drive in Burgess Hill. And although I managed to resist the lure of the zip line, other councillors did not. And I know that young residents are already enjoying use of this very welcome additional local facility, and we look forward to the play space being formally transferred over to the council. In a similar vein, I attended the Brooklands Park Consultation event in East Grinstead last week. Over 40 residents took time to visit the event, and many more have contributed online. A particular reason for highlighting the park's consultation is that in the past, people, and some even in this chamber, have thought that our parks are more about play areas and manicured spaces and less about the natural environment. And whilst there will always usually be an important element of this to the parks, the plans for the Brooklands Park are also complemented, even potentially dominated, by preservation, conservation, and enhancement of the environment of the park, and are really very exciting. And for those who haven't seen the plans, which are online, they involve expansion and enhancement of the wetlands area, opening up the stream, and creation of raised platforms and boardwalks out over the wetland area, allowing for viewing areas and fun educational spaces. For anyone listening tonight from East Grinstead, a return of a water-based amenity is not ruled out either, but it would need further work and the development of an appropriate business case before that could be brought into the scheme. Now, Brooklands Park forms part of the second tranche of parks being masterclassed in the district, which also include London Road Rec in Sussex, for which initial consultation has just finished. And I would look forward to being able to join a similar meeting for the London Road Recreation Ground in due course as the plans for that recreation ground and park move forward. Talking of green spaces and land, as we know, Mid Sussex is responsible for removing fly tipping for public land within Mid Sussex. I have had a number of questions on this from members, including at previous council meetings, and I just wanted to take this opportunity to provide a bit more perspective on this. Whilst fly tipping has increased in Mid Sussex over the last few years, the last available figures for 2019-20 show that we had 391 fly tipping instances in Mid Sussex. But that compares to Chichester, Crawley, Horsham and Arran, each having over 1,000 fly tipping instances, with Arran having nearly 1,500 fly tipping instances. Historically, our focus has been on ensuring we can respond to and remove fly tips that are reported quickly, and we can feedback on fly tips on public land has been, which when they've been removed, has been very consistently very good. Now, however, given the rise of fly tipping and the fact in some cases there may be more evidence to suggest the origin of the fly tip, we are, within existing resources, going to pursue cases where there is sufficient evidence to suggest we may secure a successful outcome. And we should note that doing this it can be a very resource-intensive exercise. I'm pleased to report the training of our officers in this respect, including in respect to the legal and regulatory issues, is taking place later this month. And I'd like to schedule a training session for members as to the Council's position and the legal position on the issues once this is done. Councillor Dimir has highlighted COP26, and I know on social media and in the press, Mid Sussex are highlighting work we've already done as a council to reduce carbon emissions, but also some of what we are looking to do in the future. And in this respect, and in terms of playing our part in increasing recycling rates in Mid Sussex, I'm pleased to see the potential food waste pilot coming forward to scrutiny later this month. As members know, this has been a project we have been considering and working towards for some time, from well before the pandemic, and the issue of food waste recycling is indeed complex. I look forward to hearing the discussion and to the advice and comments being provided in respect to the potential pilot, which would be by far the largest and most significant pilot in West Sussex to date. Thank you, Chairman. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Webster. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just two quick questions to the Cabinet Member. I welcome the about the fly tipping. As you know, I've been in correspondence with a number of officers and members about it, and if he could see for a successful prosecution on the evidence I sent to him, I would be greatly appreciate it. So would my residents. And secondly, is there any possibility of a time frame of when we're going to see some action taken on the open green spaces? I refer to in my ward at Impey's Pottage. I understand the consultation is finished and it's now just awaiting sign off, ready to start. Thank you.
Councillor Belsey.
Thank you. In respect of the specific fly tip, I will follow up with officers, and I know a couple of other members in the room, Councillor Hicks, Councillor Bennett, have also reported fly tips in the past, and officers have been corresponding on those. And secondly, in respect of Peace Pottage, I believe the plan is that the capital expenditure required for the park improvements will be going through the forecasts for next year, and it's in the first tranche of parks to be coming forward, and we are at this stage looking forward to implementation during the next financial year.
Thank you. Councillor Laband.
Surprise. Thank you, Chair. Councillor Belsey, I'm kind of greatly encouraged by the initiative on fly tipping, and look forward to the training, as I think many other members will. I've got a couple of questions. And this relates to our relatively good performance compared with the surrounding areas, is it measured on a per capita basis? And the 60th order question is, why are our figures so much better?
Belsey.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Band. No, it's based on the total number of incidences, and I don't think they even need to be reported. They're the ones that are picked up by Serco, etc., as part of our fly tipping process. They are going up, but as I said, they're still very low compared to other areas. I don't know. I like to think maybe we've got better, more informed residents who decide that fly tipping is a horrible blight on our landscape and are finding other uses for it. Thank you.
Can I move on to Councillor Hicks, please?
I'm a bit concerned by the Cabinet members' complacency in terms of fly tipping has been increasing substantially. It's gone up by 50% in the first 6 months of this year. And as has been alluded, you compare with other local authorities, but that's not necessarily on a per capita basis. And I would like to repeat a request for an assurance that fly tipping incidents are investigated. The incident that I referred to, I provided 2 addresses for the council to investigate that were delivery addresses found within the fly tipping, and I was not asking for prosecution or any other issue other than the matter was investigated, and for instance those addresses were approached and a request made to identify the actual waste carrier used so that we could approach that person. If we're not even able to investigate fly tipping, let alone issue fixed penalty notices or provide other action against it, I think that there's no room to be complacency.
Councillor Belsey.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think there is any complacency. Part of the reason for me addressing it this evening was to explain about to confirm that the training was taking place. And I did acknowledge again that the fly tipping was going up. I think any fly tipping, one fly tip is one fly tip too many. So I'm afraid I don't really understand that point. But in respect of your specific points, I know you've raised it before at council, and it's still the same fly tip you're referring to. We have in the past issued warning notices to people where we're aware of the addresses, and the point about the training is to ensure that we will be able to follow up appropriately on that. So I think we will see, if the circumstances permit, we will see more movement on this going forwards. Thank you.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chairman. At the Scrutiny Committee for Leader Finance and Performance on the 15th of September, the statistics relating to the performance of the council were discussed, and specifically the fact that fly tipping stats at that point in time weren't being included in those quarterly performance stats. After a fairly extensive discussion, the chairman of that scrutiny committee said that the question of fly tipping would be referred back to Cabinet to see what more can be done. So whilst I very much welcome the training of officers and would like to thank Councillor Belsey and the officers involved for making that possible, I would like to see what more can be done on fly tipping by this council. I know there are other authorities who do more and have more tools at their disposal, and it would be good if we could review that. And I was wondering, Councillor Belsey, how and what mechanisms there are for having that conversation. Thank you.
Councillor Belsey.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Bennett, for the question. As you said, it was something I think to be coming forward to Cabinet, so I will make sure that it does, and I'm sure that we will have a discussion as to what indicators are possible, but also it's just a balance, as you said, though, of resources, funding, training, etc. But we will see what can be done to be more helpful for members and residents in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to also very much welcome the recently completed consultation on London Road Rec. And as Councillor Belsey knows, it's been a site that's had a lot of, it's been waiting for a long time for potential refurbishment despite there being money attached to it. And I'd just like to thank Councillor Belsey for his intervention to help speed up that process. It's been delayed for various reasons, mainly the pandemic, but also because it's a complicated site where there's a playground plus car park plus sports facilities, and the consultation's looking at all of that. So I'd like to thank Councillor Belsey, but also just to ask to make sure that, given that it is potentially complex with different moving parts, that when the consultation is considered, that it will be moved upon and expedited as quickly as possible. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. We have no one else wishing to speak to Councillor Belsey, so we're going to move on. Oh, Mr. Gibson. I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was a little late in getting my hand up. Just a couple of points on the food waste trial. Can we be sure that it fits in with the government's ideas, which I think are going to come out next year, for the overall treatment of waste and the way in which they're going to put that forward? And I understand there's a critical mass involved if there was such a concept with food waste. I just wonder, where is it going to go? Because I know that this has taxed the county council in terms of getting enough together. Just assurance that both those issues will be dealt with when the trial's been designed.
Councillor Belsey.
Thank you, Chairman. And Councillor Gibson is obviously right to highlight some of the complexities of the issue with ourselves as the disposing authority, collection authority, and West Sussex as the disposing authority. I don't want to prejudge what the scrutiny committee is going to find, but I know that, well, as far as I'm concerned, that all the relevant information would be put forward in the papers to the scrutiny committee that will allow a sort of a robust discussion with as far as anybody can say without having a crystal ball as to what direction, for example, government might go in the future. But certainly all the facts pertinent to the pilot will be within those papers.
Thank you. I see no further hands, so I'm going to move on to Cabinet Member for Community, Councillor Webster.
Thank you, Chairman. At our last meeting of Council, a question was asked about there being no women's refuge in mid-Sussex, and it was asked if there was a plan to provide one to comply with the government's requirement that all local authorities provide a refuge. My response was that this issue had been discussed at police and crime scrutiny panels and that the Council is working with Sussex Police to ensure people of mid-Sussex and our neighbouring districts and boroughs are kept safe. I would like to provide some further information on this important issue, which does actually affect both men and women and children. And under the new duty, Tier 1 authorities, in our case, West Sussex County Council, are required to convene a domestic abuse local partnership board, complete a needs assessment, prepare and publish strategies, commission support to victims of domestic abuse and their children within safe accommodation services in their area. And they are required to report back to central government that they have met these obligations. West Sussex were allocated funds to meet their obligations, and the process of setting up a partnership board is underway. Additionally, the 3 Tier 1 Sussex authorities commissioned the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office to undertake a pan-Sussex needs assessment and strategy on supported accommodation, and a draft has now been produced and has gone out to consultation. And I would urge anyone interested to take part in, and I quote, have your say on the draft domestic abuse, accommodation and support strategy for Sussex. Your voice, West Sussex. And I believe it is obtainable on the West Sussex County Council website. As a Tier 2 authority, Mid-Sussex District Council were also allocated a modest amount of funding to support our Tier 1 authority. It was agreed at the West Sussex Strategic Housing Partnership Group that the funds that were allocated to the districts and boroughs would be pooled together and managed by West Sussex County Council for projects benefiting all of the boroughs and districts. And that, Chairman, is my report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Webster. Does anyone have any question for Councillor Webster? No? Councillor Bennett. I nearly got
Apologies and thanks, Chairman. So if I was in a situation where I needed to seek refuge because I was in a position of being domestically abused, where would I end up being placed? How far would I need to travel from my local community?
Councillor Webster.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Bennett, for the question. The overriding priority is that people who are suffering domestic abuse are accommodated in safe accommodation, which could be within Mid-Sussex. But if supported housing accommodation was required, I believe at this point in time, the closest accommodation is in Crawley, which is why I stressed the fact that the Commission's support to victims of domestic abuse and their children with safe accommodation services in their area. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Webster. I see no further hands, so I'm going to move on to the Cabinet Member for Housing and Planning, Councillor Robert Salisbury.
Thank you, Chairman. The last time I spoke to you, I was sitting next to a door and it worried me, but I see I've got an empty space next to me tonight, so that gives me some confidence. And I think someone mentioned COP26, and I think if it carries on with the temperatures rising the way it is, can we please meet here again? Because the air conditioning here is second to none. Even the ink in my pen is frozen. We talk about planning and housing. Can I just divide planning up a bit? Because when you build a house, you design it and you get approval and then you build it. And people often think that the building regulations falls within planning, and it doesn't. It falls with my good friend here, Councillor Webster. So actually what we're talking about is development management, and that's the term that's used within the council, although planning is the euphemism we all use. I'm pleased to say that even with all the difficulties we've got now, the development management team continue to produce excellent results with hitting all their targets, even though the workload is up 11% at the moment, which is good news for the budget because that brings in a little bit more money as well. And appeals, we are getting 80% of them dismissed, which you may say, what happens to the other 20%? Well, you should go to some appeal hearings and watch the way the inspectors deal with them to know why the other 20% happens. I think our officers do a jolly good job. The other thing that is really encouraging is Freaks Lane development, which is coming on a pace now, and that's really important in that we've got to remember that that's 50% of affordable housing, and so the quicker that comes online, the better. The bit that we're all waiting for still hasn't happened. We have not yet had the inspector's letter on the site's DPD, so we await that with I would hope urgency, because we're now well into November, or we're coming into November, so we're looking for that. On the housing front, I think this is the most important bit of this, really. I mean, both sides are equally important, but housing at the moment, for me, is a real concern. We're in the process of examining the viability of extending our temporary accommodation, possibly between 11 and 13 units. You will remember that we agreed to buy in units to increase our temporary accommodation within Mid-Sussex. So that's going ahead at the moment. Obviously, the details of that are commercially sensitive, but you'll hear that rolled out, hopefully, in the near future. We currently have 113, either individuals or families, in temporary accommodation. It's about 50-50, I understand, the split. About half of them are individuals and the other half are families. And I noted that there was a question at scrutiny about, can we have a trend line for that? Well, I've asked officers to draw a line to see what it looks like, and I'm hoping that'll come forward in the next few days, and I'll share it with people when we've got it. But this is very much something that is driven by the economy. And as we know at the moment, the shape, my gut feel is that the trend line is only going to be linked to a steep curve, as at the moment, businesses are remodeling. And as you see the furlough scheme ending, we're starting to see redundancies. Employers are now, particularly the ones I've been noting are in the airline industry, where the airlines kept them on furlough and now they're coming out and having to find other jobs locally. And I think that's going to have a big impact on our housing team further down the line. So I think the winter is unlikely to be easy for some of the families in our district, unfortunately, and there'll be a lot of work within Mid-Sussex to try and help them. And that's my report. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Councillor Salisbury. Has anyone got any questions for Councillor Salisbury? Councillor Gibson.
I apologise for standing up yet again, Madam Chairman. It's on the DPD, the site selection DPD, and the fact that this council agreed a statement of common ground on a site in my ward, which is SA22. Implicit in that statement of common ground was that this council accepted that the developer would attempt to buy out one of the properties in the existing community in order to knock it down and gain access to the site. The residents have reported to me this week that the level of the bid has raised to £250,000. Now, my questions are that does that really reflect the intention of the NPPF in terms of the definition of a deliverable site? And given that we've reached this impossible situation, will the council now consider the removal of site SA22 from the list of those sites in the DPD? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson, for that question. That's a very specific question, and if I may, I'll get the absolute information for you and write to you on the subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Salisbury. I see no further questions to be asked. So we're going to move on to item 10, which is questions from members pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 10.2. Now we have two questions from Councillor Paul Brown, which are going to be asked individually and answered individually. I would point out to members and to Councillor Brown that we have allowed 30 minutes in total for this item. So if I ask Councillor Brown to ask your first question, which is going to be responded to by Councillor Salisbury.
Thank you, Chairman. How many new build homes have been occupied in mid-Sussex and equipped by the developers with solar photovoltaic systems in the financial year 2020 to 2021? And what is the aggregate peak power capacity and the kilograms of CO2 equivalent emissions saved by these installations? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown, for that. I'm happy to provide you with a reply, but unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be the specifics that you seek. Okay, the government does not require new homes to be built with solar PV systems. And therefore, it's not data that we would gather. We don't provide officer time to measure historic specifics, but more appropriately, we focus on the future requirements as laid down by government. And as you know, there are a huge truckload of those requirements coming down over the next few years. There are two regulatory regimes which relate to the development of new homes. There's planning and building regs, which I mentioned just earlier. The building regulations set mandatory standards regarding carbon reduction, which must be met by the developers. The government does not require the same of the planning system. So it's down to the developers to reach the building regulation requirements, which presumably they measure to show their compliance. So the question about that is more accurately aimed at the developers. We don't keep that data. The Future Home Standard sets out the government's latest changes to building regs to ensure the reduction of carbon emissions of 31% from the 2013 level, which I'm sure will know about. This requirement will come into effect in June 2022, quite a while since 2013. By 2025, the same year that gas boilers are no longer permitted in new development, the Future Home Standard requires carbon reduction emissions of between 75 and 80% compared to current levels. So that's the truck that I was referring to earlier. And that's the thing that our officers are looking at the moment and developing processes to deal with. To achieve a high energy performance rating from a building, the starting point should be to minimize the need for energy by ensuring a high level of insulation, which the regulations will do. And this is the basic of the fabric first approach, which this council not only encourages, but ensures that developers comply with. And it's the fabric first approach which has proven that heat pumps, either ground or solar, are in fact more effective than solar panels. I've got all the stuff here about how we fit in with policy DP36 and the rest of it, but you have to remember also that during the examination, the inspector said that we should not be too prescriptive in standards regarding greenhouse gas emissions, as the independent planning inspector said when he examined the draft plan. He required us to make the policy that we had written less prescriptive. So, you know, he wanted to keep policies broad. So I'm sorry that that doesn't give you those specific numbers you were looking for, but I hope it gives you some direction about where we are going. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Salisbury. Councillor Brown, you are entitled to ask a further question in respect to the response made by Councillor Salisbury.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Councillor Salisbury, for that very comprehensive answer. I was wondering if, well, from my own personal observations, the only places I've seen in the year in which I've asked the question, and earlier years, installation of PVs on new builds was in the case of affordable housing. And I was wondering if that information was available. That should be fairly easy to capture and save me cycling around the district and having a look for myself. Thank you.
Councillor Salisbury.
Thank you, Councillor. I note that, and I will ask the officers whether that information is available. Whether it is or not, I can't guarantee, but I will certainly, we will look at that and come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown, would you like to ask your second question, please?
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is a question to Cabinet Member Dimir, Councillor Dimir. And this is regarding Oaklands. What is the peak installed power capacity of the solar PV system installed at Oaklands council offices? And what is the total energy generated and the equivalent kilograms of CO2 emissions saved by this system in the financial year 2021-2022? And in case members are, well, I've not been able to deduce that from the KPIs, so that's why I'm asking this specific question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brown, you think I'm as young as Councillor Llewellyn Burke?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Brown. I'm answering because Oaklands campus is part of the council's estate and therefore falls within my portfolio. So the peak capacity of the solar PV system in the council offices at Oaklands is 28.6 kilowatts. And the annual report, which was report of the sustainability strategy, which was reported to scrutiny on the 10th of March of this year, stated that the PV panels on the council's buildings produced 27,404 kilowatt hours of solar electricity during 2020-2021. And the full year total actually increased to 27,467 after the report was published. So this showed a carbon reduction of 6.99 tonnes and accounts for about 10% of the council's electricity demand. So since 2017, 88,493 kilowatt hours of pollution-free electricity has been generated, the equivalent of the annual emissions from 25 homes. I'll also add as well that the depot, Serco depot, at the Bridge Road Industrial Estate saves about 6,000 tonnes of carbon per year. But I have no further details on that.
Councillor Brown, do you wish to come back? Please do.
Thank you very much, Councillor Llewellyn Burke, for answering that. In answering, are you talking of CO2 equivalent or carbon dioxide equivalent or carbon in that response? And also, you mentioned 6.9 tonnes of CO2 saving at Oaklands, and then at the Serco site, I think you said 6,000. So I wonder if you might like to tell me later so we're not wasting time, but thank you very much.
Yes, apologies. I think everyone's getting rather cold, so I'll provide you a written answer if that's all right.
Thank you, Councillor Wellenberg. I'm sure that everybody will be pleased to know that you can go and get warm, because I'm going to close the meeting at 20:44. Thank you very much for attending and for your patience. I would ask members to remain in place for a few seconds for the live stream to end. And I would like to remind members that on the 8th of December, which will be our final council meeting for the year, it will be followed by light refreshments. And so your wives, husbands, partners are all welcome to come